Hello, dear friends. Best greetings from Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine. Hello, dear friends. Best greetings from Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine. This is my channel, Dr. Viktor Fursov, entomologist, beekeeper teacher. Welcome to my stream. Welcome to my discussion about Ukraine, about history of Ukraine. Actually, my channel is devoted to biology, entomology science about insects, beekeeping and teaching. And today I will be talking about another teacher of history, because this Ukrainian schoolmaster and teacher became quite popular in Ukraine. He has a very popular YouTube channel. I have his photograph, which was published recently in the journal. Yes, he's here on this photo. Quite interesting, isn't it? Quite interesting person. Alexandrovich, Vitaly Alexandrovich Dribnitsa. Vitaly Alexandrovich, I just need to check the position of the stream because I cannot see it on computer. This one. Why I decided to tell you about him? This person became very popular on YouTube, and today I will be talking about him in English. Because he's actually a Ukrainian teacher. He's speaking in Ukrainian language with Ukrainian and Russian audience. And he has been published here not for simple purpose, but very important purpose, because he is distributing very useful, very interesting, and very knowledgeable information about Ukrainian history as professional historian. He actually was a historian as a teacher, because now he's on pension. YouTube channel is just his new job on pension, which is very successful and, by the way, quite profitable and very popular now. So his intensive outreach activity, not in biology but in history, gave him a huge popularity for Ukrainian audience. As he said, about 95% of his audience, this is a Ukrainian audience, and only 5% people from Russia. What he's doing, what is his channel on YouTube about? I will tell you about it because I found also quite interesting publication in New York Times journal. Yes, New York Times journal made a special interview in and just review about his activities. Under the title here was published the article, "The Ukrainian Schoolmaster Teaching History to His Invaders." That's not quite correctly. I will indicate some small mistakes. He's teaching history for Ukrainians, not for Russians, not to his invaders. Because, as I said, 95% of his audience are Ukrainians. And it's quite understandable, because he's trying to persuade some people to change their opinion, because he's talking with Russians and sometimes with Ukrainian persons on YouTube, not on the YouTube channel, but on special channel which is named Chat Roulette. This is a web platform for communication of strangers. Actually, his name is Vitaly Alexandrovich Dribnitsa. He's located and he's living and working in Bila Tserkva in Kyiv region. Vitaly Dribnitsa engages with Russian online to correct Kremlin propaganda about Ukraine. Over the time, he has come to realize that his more important audience, this is Ukrainian people themselves. What is about his goal? The goal to teach Ukrainians or Russians? To teach Russians, citizens of nation that has invaded his a bit Ukrainian history. Yes, because our neighbor Russians, they're trying to steal Ukrainian history. For example, he is making connections with strangers on chat roulette and making kind of discussion, asking questions from other people, from audience. And I will give you some examples from New York Times interview and from this journal. This journal is named Country, the country Ukraine. Ukraina journal published in Kyiv in Ukrainian language. And here a little bit published about his biography and about his activities, so I can cite some interesting stories about Vitaly Drobnitsa. For example, within minutes, a middle-aged Russian man appeared on screen in chat roulette, and Vitaly is talking with him, speaking. First, he is usually making first question, asking, "What book about Ukraine have you been reading recently?" Majority of people are telling, "I didn't read any book." But some people can tell, "I read some books about about Russian history, like Karamzin, like something like that. I read about Peter the Great history," and asking some, he's talking. If you didn't read any book, that's normal. It's possible, no problem about it. But his topic for discussion is precisely the history, not politics, not propaganda. He's not trying to persuade adults about their opinions about history and politics. No. As he told in his interview to different channels and different journals, that he's not trying too much to persuade the Russian audience to change their mind, because he's talking with adults, 18 plus audience. It's quite difficult, it's practically impossible to change mind of Russian zombie people about history, about their thoughts about their politics. Because adults are adults. They can think themselves after the discussion. He's telling people some resources, some books, some journals, some articles, which we can search in internet, in library, can read, and maybe step by step, little bit by little bit, can change a little bit their opinion, maybe, or maybe not. Because 90% of Russian audience, unfortunately, is zombie people like that. For example, the example of connection with people on screen on chat roulette. From one side, this person, Vitaly Drobnitsa, from another side, person from Russian audience. Middle-aged Russian man appeared on screen, speaking from that situation looked like a grocery store. Vitaly Drobnitsa, this man, the history teacher, wasted no time opening with deliberately provocating question. Who does Crimea belong to? He asked, referring to Ukrainian Black Sea Peninsula that Russia illegally annexed in 2018. Russian men usually asked and reply like that, to us, to Russians, without any hesitation. This is very common answer. What followed was a dizzying exchange on the historical roots of Ukraine and Russia, Ukraine's war for independence from 1917 to 1921, and Ukrainian language. At times, the Russian man hesitated about historical facts, but at the end, he waved it all away. He's saying, the internet will tell you everything, he said. We know that Ukraine never existed and will never will. This is very common Russian answer of many people. This is just only one of hundreds of online conversations of Mr. Drobnitsa, this Ukrainian teacher, a former middle school and high school teacher, has had with the random Russians on website chat roulette. over the past 3 years of war between Russia and Ukraine, as he seeks to challenge the Kremlin's narrative that Ukrainian's nationhood is a fiction, and by his extension that Ukraine belongs to Russia. Majority of Russian people from Russian audience saying, Ukraine belongs to Russia. We know about it, isn't it? They say like that. Almost every day, for several hours a day, Mr. Drobnitsa, this one, they say, he's on screen here on this journal, Ukraine, engages with Russian on chat roulette website using a matter-of-fact tone, very polite tone, very teachable tone, but sharp questions to try to debunk widely held beliefs in Russia. For example, that Ukraine as a nation was created by Soviet Union, USSR created, that Lenin created Ukraine. This is a mythology, myth of Russian citizens, which just persistently input in the heads of Russians for the latest 10 years. Another myth that its leaders, Ukrainian leaders, are neo-Nazis, that their language is merely a dialect of Russian. Ukrainian language doesn't exist. It's just a dialect. This is strange, but very common opinion of Russians. Videos of this Ukrainian teacher, Mr. Drobnitsa, promotes candid discussions, which he uploads on YouTube, and then his interesting discussions have attracted a huge following in Ukraine. His YouTube channel is called Vox Veritatis in Latin. Vox Veritas, the voice of truth, or another translation in English, voice of justice. Here, very tiny distance between truth and justice. So his channel boosts nearly up to 500,000 subscribers, with Ukrainians watching the conversation to learn more about their own history and sharpen their arguments in defense of Ukraine's right for sovereignty. Mr. Drobnitsa exchanges have offered a rare and unusual window into the politicization of history of Russia, shedding light on the ideological foundations between Russia's attempts to erase Ukraine's past and identity, including attempts of systematically destroying Ukrainian cultural sites and stories and history. Mr. Drobnitsa, this man, he's telling, people usually don't know about their own history. It's quite normal. But in this Russian-Ukrainian war, it is not just ignorance. This is weaponization of history. He's saying in his recent interview in his hometown Bila Tserkva in Kyiv region. I'm just trying to set the record straight. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. I need to delete some bots. It's quite convenient to delete some haters. Very well. This Vitaly Drobnitsa, a burly man with a white beard, He knows from experience how history can be used as a political tool. He studies history in Kiev in final years of the Soviet Union, that Ukraine was a part of USSR when liberalization reforms were beginning to lift the lid on decades of hushed up historical events. For example, he said stories in his interviews that he remembered the time of last years of the Soviet Union when his professors in pedagogical university were describing the genocide, the Holodomor, the Kremlin engineering famine that killed millions of Ukrainians in 1932-33, as it described like this was invention of Western bourgeoisie historians, some professors said. But in this time, it was possible, but only for students to later read about famine in what resource? Newspaper Pravda, a Communist Party official newspaper, that Holodomor, Kremlin engineering famine, didn't exist, as Pravda said. So everyone needed to believe in this. Can you understand it? Vitaly Drevnitsa, when he was a student of Kyiv Pedagogical University, he's saying in his interview, "We entered Pedagogical University as typical Soviet students, but by the time we graduated, in the latest years of perestroika, latest years of communist propaganda, the ideological landscape has completely changed. For people who graduated with a master's degree in 1991, the year the Soviet Union collapsed, and Ukraine declared the independence in 1991. Vitaly Drevnitsa, this man, he started teaching the same year, using textbooks that had not been updated from Soviet times. That's why he needed to rely on his own personal research, different resources, and books written by little-known reformist historian to present his personal version to events as accurate as possible. Always this teacher of history saying that most important part in history is to base the ideas and description of history on resources, historical resources, from archives, from historical publications, from studies of historians, professionals, not from outreach publications, not from popular books and from literature, from poems, poetry, and so far so good, but from historical publication, professional historical publications. He said, I understood that I had to teach children with new information, the facts that had never been open before, but either have been hidden from us or just destroyed by Soviet history. And also he indicates a very interesting fact, which is weakly known by public. Some people asking, I know history from textbooks from school, from my college, but he indicated that all books, all textbooks, this is not precise historical study. This is not professional historical study. Books, textbooks for students, colleges, schools, universities, this is a historical didactics, explanation of historical events in modern time, an explanation in modern time, in modern style in that or that political situation. And this explanation is changeable from time to time and always changeable. So this is historical didactics. And in different countries, historians explain history absolutely different way. Some students of Mr. Dribnitsa in his former college remember him as demanding but yet passionate teacher, that he wanted each of us to know history because a person can only move forward and make informed decisions by understanding the past, by understanding the history, some of his former students say. Do you remember the special conference in Europe when the leader of Russia explained some situation about Russia and Ukraine and published special essay about history? This leader claimed that Ukrainians and Russians are one people, one nation, one nation. And this was a huge argument he would later use to justify his invasion as a liberation of Ukraine from the West in 2022, as the start of Russian-Ukrainian war. Justification to start the war to liberate Ukraine from West, from Western influence, and from leaders and from Ukrainians. Because Ukrainians and Russians, from his opinion, just one people, one nation. Strange. Do you believe it? Maybe he believes, maybe they believe. But Ukrainians do not believe it and know that this is a lie. This Ukrainian teacher, alarmed by Kremlin's propaganda, began devoting his time to engage in online discussions with Russians and with Russian audience on chat roulette about history. But what started as an attempt on open dialogue quickly evolved into a special project on YouTube channel called Vox Veritatis, the voice of truth, the voice of justice in English translation. This project evolved into a project focused on debunking Moscow's narrative, particularly about Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, 24th February 2022. Of course, we need to underline that chat roulette, this is not the whole Ukrainian and Russian audience for intelligent discussion. This is not intelligent Russian people, not at all. Chat roulette, this is a discussion with unknown strangers on internet, usually not from the middle society, not from the upper part of society, but from the lower classes, lowers of society, or just below the lowers. Because many people on chat roulette website, drunk, smoking, eating, drinking, naked, just badly dressed, speaking badly, with slang, with weakly understandable ideas, and they do not know anything about history, and not only about history. The poor, the lowest layer of society, unfortunately. Nevertheless, after years of experience, this Ukrainian teacher has a persistence and also such kind of ideas how to find interesting people, not interesting people, but to be very careful with this in discussion, to be very patient in discussion, to be correct. Because with stubborn people, with zombie people, it's difficult to discuss. But he's very careful. He's very He's talking usually very careful and very patiently. For example, in one of his videos, he recorded a conversation which became very popular. He responds to the man who claims that Russians and Ukrainian are brothers, which is making the same echo of declaration of Russian leaders' argument that Russians and Ukrainians, they're the same nation. And he asks Mr. Drobnitsa, how do you define brotherly nations? Why Russians and Ukrainians are brotherly nations, brothers? And this Russian man on chat roulette replied, from history, we have a shared past. Our history was the same. But Ukrainian teacher answering him, if Austrians and Hungarians who lived in Austro-Hungarian Empire, people lived in Austro-Hungarian, reply, does that mean that Austrians and Hungarians are the same brothers? He snaps back, pointing to two nations that are now neighbors, Austrians and Hungarians, but speak different languages and have distinctly different traditions. Again, the Russian man then points that Russia and Ukraine share a common religion, Christian Orthodoxy. So, Vitaly Drobnitsa responded him, noting that about 10% of Ukrainians are belonging to Greek Catholics, especially in western parts of Ukraine, but in Kyiv as well. And pressing again, why should Russians and Ukrainians be considered brothers, considered to be brotherly nations? Maybe I'm mistaken, the Russian man considers, though I don't think so. Stubborn people cannot be persuaded, even by facts, even by logics, even by historical facts. Write your comments under this video and write your comments in chat. I will read it carefully and discuss it later. Thank you for Bluebird, who is joining us from Poland. And I will tell you more about this man, about his ideas, his answers, and his interesting discussions on Chat Roulette website. As far as we indicated now, since 3 years ago, Mr. Drobnitsa, Ukrainian teacher of history, has recorded more than 1,500 conversations on YouTube channel. Though to plant seeds of doubts in some of his interlocutors, though he often counters outright hostility. By his own admission, he hasn't had much success changing people's mind, as I already explained. It's difficult to change people's mind, to persuade them to change their ideas. Most Russians he encounters either dismiss his arguments outright or making echo Kremlin talking points. Only in very small minority, usually those people who oppose the war, can be engaged in genuine historical debates. For example, in a recent online chat, one Russian woman praised his work, urging him to keep laying out the facts. Young, 27 years old Russian boy who opposed the war said in an interview that videos he taught him about events completely overlooked in Russian textbooks, such as existence of Ukrainian state in late 1910s, yes, the beginning of 20th century. Okay. You can search in internet. You can search also in some book markets and bookshops for this journal as well. And you can search for this journal in internet. Or you can check YouTube channel Vox Veritatis, YouTube channel of this man. But today I'm talking more not for Russian or Ukrainian audience, but I'm talking more about Ukrainian teacher for English-speaking audience in other countries, because this interesting publication about this man, Vitaly Drobnitsa, was published in the New York Times, and it's hidden somewhere in internet so deeply. It's difficult to find, but YouTube channel has opportunity to show, to explain it for more people. Over time, Mr. Drobnitsa realized that his true audience isn't Russians, but to be correct, to be honest, the millions of Ukrainians who were educated in Soviet times, millions of people of old age or golden age, and now want to update their knowledge, as a part of broader movement in wartime Ukraine, to break free from decades of Soviet and Russian influences. For example, some of his videos, this man, Vitaly Drobnitsa, where he discusses the first appearance of Ukraine on world maps, or the complex history of Ukrainian nationalist movements. Two topics which are quite tough, difficult, that were either ignored or completely distorted in Soviet textbooks. These topics have gained millions of views on his YouTube channel, Vox Veritatis. For example, one of his viewers told in an interview, "I'm learning a lot from him," mentioning, "Formed in the Soviet Union. I was formed in the Soviet Union, but now I received a new knowledge. Now I'm feeling more confident to argue with acquaintances who don't know our history at all and spreading just only Russian narratives." This Ukrainian teacher of history, in his conversations, is often asked about the darker chapters of Ukrainian history. Yes, some people asking him very tough questions. For example, including the questions about collaboration of nationalist movements with Nazis during the Second World War. He doesn't shy about it. He doesn't shy away from the topic, acknowledging the collaboration, while also noting that Nazis later suppressed those same groups. Every second person from Russian audience asked about Bandera. Who is Bandera and what he is doing for Ukrainian nation? And he was collaborating with Germans. Arguments, historical arguments based on historical facts. Vitaly Drobnitsa said, "Do you know that Bandera was in a prison during the Second World War? He was in a prison, and he never left prison till the end of war. And later he came just to Germany, but he was always, and later he was killed by KGB people. But he was not active member of nationalist movement. He was not fighting himself. He was ideological person." And many people asking him, "What do you think about Bandera?" Only one question is very important for Russian audience. Why about Bandera? Because they're so tough, they're so suppressed by the Russian Kremlin propaganda that only one question is important for them. Why do you acknowledge the Bandera? Is he positive or he is negative? What do you think? From your opinion, Mr. Drobnitsa said, "From my opinion, he is positive because I'm considering him as a hero of Ukraine because he promoted the Ukrainian independence activity in Ukraine. He said that it will be the time in the world and in Ukraine then just dozens, hundreds, thousands of people will say glory to Ukraine, and millions of people will declare glory to heroes. These were his words that now are on the shield of Ukrainian nation, on the shield of Ukrainian warriors. And now Bandera is considered as a national hero, as a symbol of national hero, despite he was not fighting himself personally for Ukrainian independence. So dark chapters of Ukrainian history is a difficult story, but not everyone knows about it. Not everyone can acknowledge it, and not everyone can explain it. Watch his stories, watch his discussions, and you can learn a lot about it. 3 years of Russia-Ukrainian war and as much time trying to correct historical falsehoods have taken a toll on Mr. Dribnitsa. Sometimes he loses his calm, more often during online conversation. And he has come to believe in it futile to try to change the minds of his Russian interlocutors. Most of audience on chat roulette website to target Ukrainians and to push their fabricated pro-Kremlin narratives, he said. They are not here to hear a different perspective or learn something new. Nevertheless, his prominent ideas, his active outreach activity to promote Ukrainian history on internet, on YouTube channel, his active outreach activities have been supported by different other YouTube channels and even officials. So his channel is actively promoted on YouTube. He is actively promoted in Ministry of Education. Even he got some ideas, some lessons to be more widely distributed and used for teaching Ukrainian history, with some recommendations of Ministry of Education. And then some professional historian saying publicly that efforts of Mr. Dribnitsa actually make perfect sense. It's about restoring our dignity, providing that Ukraine as a nation exists, fighting and will fight for independence and for freedom. Sometimes, and quite often in his discussions, and also in this journal, he was asked about his personal view on historical identity and historical leaders. For example, who was here? This is a question about, can you say about the most important leaders in history of Ukraine? So I want to answer. I want to read his answers. He said, one of very important person, this was the King Volodymyr Sviatoslavovich, which was known as a Vladimir the Great, who based the basement of Christian civilization on the territory of modern Ukraine. And some resources indicates that in historical narratives and historical publications, he was mentioned very briefly, only 5 or 6 times. Another person, this is a Bogdan Khmelnytsky. He based the early modern Ukrainian statehood, despite the attitude to him from different historian is not the same, can be different. But different approach of different historian, this is very normal for democratic society. just only one opinion, one meaning, this is a sign of totalitarian state. Another person, this is Ivan Mazepa. He tried in situations when Ukrainian statehood was going down, try to make some actions to fight for independence of Ukraine. Other persons, for example, leaders of Central Rada, Central Council in 1921, were different. Federalist Grushevsky or Mikhnovsky. Very important person was Simon Petlura, who fought for independence of Ukraine. And of course, he made some mistakes and faults. In the time of Soviet period, it was difficult to indicate people. One of the very bright person was Vyacheslav Chernovil. He was a leader, and he had the opportunity to lead people in the way of independence of Ukraine. So this was a story about this man, Vitaly Dribnitsa. If you are interested to know about him, visit his channel, which is named Vox Veritatis. Quite interesting channel about Ukraine. Quite interesting channel about Ukrainian history. If you know Ukrainian language, so you can come to him, to his channel, to listen and to have your personal ideas, personal opinion about his explanations, about his methodology, because sometimes he's not very patient. Sometimes he's arguing very strongly in a very strong way, because he's sometimes very difficult to be patient with stubborn audience. Nevertheless, you can see, you can understand his ideas, and you can check what does it mean to be poisoned by Russian propaganda, as it is written here on this Ukrainian journal. Journal is state, not state, sorry, country. Country, state is Ukraine, country, Ukraina. Country, and here it's written the article, poisoned by Russian propaganda. So you can listen to his stories and understand why Russian people, why many people in this strange neighboring country have been poisoned by pro-war propaganda. And don't forget, Ukraine is fighting for independence, for freedom in Kyiv. This is the capital of freedom in Ukraine. And don't forget, support my channel, stand with Ukraine, support Ukraine, help Ukraine, pray for Ukraine, and Ukraine forever. Looking forward to see you on my channel. The sooner, the better. I will tell you more stories about Ukrainian bio nature, because today I have unusual stream about Ukrainian history. If you are interested to know more about Ukrainian history, not only about Ukrainian nature, I have more journals. Ukraine, so I can tell you more stories about Ukraine from the person who is now in Kyiv, capital of Ukraine. Sometimes I'm feeling myself not so well because of Russian drones flying around. Sometimes it's quite noisy in night time. Today and yesterday was a little bit quiet. And history is existing even now in Kyiv. And I'm in this time in Kyiv. In the time not only of peaceful conversations on internet, like Ukrainian teacher, but you see here Roman Besmertny, former deputy, talking about some strange situations in the war time between Russia and Ukraine. Thank you for watching. Ukraine forever. See you soon on my channel. Bye-bye. Write your comments, ask questions.